Good evening. The topic that we'll discuss this evening is about the topology and geography of the planet Earth, and how we can understand the different components of the surface of the Earth to correspond to the different sefirot, and thereby to correspond to a endless number of other phenomena and facets of reality, which we can always embellish our knowledge and appreciation of God's creation. The land of the earth is generally divided into 7 continents, and the oceans of the earth, which actually cover 71% of the surface of the earth, which is much more than the dry land, the continents, are originally and normally divided into 3 great oceans. In more recent times, so for reasons which are not actually scientific reasons, the Arctic Ocean is added and the Southern Ocean is added. But in reality, as was always known and explained, the Arctic Ocean is simply an offshoot of the Atlantic Ocean, and the Southern Ocean is also a offshoot of the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. So the 3 great oceans are: the Pacific is the greatest, the biggest of all, which is almost 50% of the water that covers the surface of the earth, and the Atlantic is the second biggest, and the third biggest is the Indian Ocean, which is south of India, and that's for that reason it's called the Indian Ocean. And to its west it extends into Africa, and to its east it extends to Australia. And to its south it reaches the Antarctic continent, or reaches the furthest southern water body of the earth. And again, nowadays, some people want to call that the Southern Ocean, but it's just an extension, basically, of the Indian Ocean. Alright, so if you have this basic division of 3 oceans, 3 great oceans, and 7 continents, that immediately suggests that this must correspond to the 3 supernal sefirot, which are called Hanistarot Hashem Elokeinu, the relatively hidden sefirot, which in the soul of man, the psyche of man, are the intellectual faculties of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, Chokhmah, Binah, Da'at. And the 7 continents, which are theoretically the place where man can live, and they're inhabitable, even though not all of the dry land is actually inhabited. Some is still desert. But dry land is a place that a land animal and also the human being can live on. So those correspond to the seven human attributes, which are the 7 emotions of the heart, 7 emotive attributes of the heart, which correspond themselves to the 7 days of creation. As we know, it says, Lo tohu v'ra'ah la'shevet yitzara. The creation was for the sake of being able to live there, to inhabit the created world. So creation, which is for the sake of inhabitation of man, is basically the 7 continents of the earth. And the seas are relatively still in the state of tohu. Like it says, Lo tohu v'ra'ah. The 3 higher sefirot are tohu. Even at the very beginning of the Torah, the 2nd verse of the Torah reads, that there was an abyss and there was all water. At the beginning, the whole face of the earth was covered by water. There was no dry land yet present at all and revealed at all. And that initial state, that the whole planet Earth was covered exclusively by waters, is referred to by 3 terms: Tov, Vavo, V'choshech. It's an abyss, it's a void, and it's empty, and it's dark. And all of those three characteristics are characteristics of the abyss, which is the primordial waters that covered all of the face of the earth. So we have that these three, and this is the way it's explained in Kabbalah itself, these three words describe the three supernal sfirot of Chokhmah, Binah, and Dat, or sometimes the three are referred to as Keter, the crown of Chokhmah and Binah. But as we'll explain, they correspond to the intellectual faculties of Chokhmah, Binah, and Dat. And then the seven are the seven inhabited regions and areas of the soul, which are the seven continents. So this is just a general overview or understanding of why there are three great oceans and seven continents. Let's say another important thing about the oceans are actually all connected. There's just one world. We could think of it as all just one world ocean, because all of the waters are ultimately connected to one another, more so than the continents. So what does that mean? It means that in a certain sense all of the three higher hidden sfirot, which is represented by water, or by the seas. In Kabbalah, the seas are always referred to as the hidden world, Almadit Kasya, and the beings, or the consciousness within that hidden world are called the fish that swim in the seas. That's why there are certain souls also that come from the very most concealed and hidden levels that are referred to as Nuneyama, the fish of the sea. Their consciousness is one of the hidden worlds, one of the three higher emanations of Hashem, the Sfirot. But ultimately it's all one. It's just all one great body of water that surrounds or circumscribes the earth. In Kabbalah we're taught that the three higher Sfirot all belong to one chamber. One of the most basic fundamental concepts in the Kabbalah are there are the seven chambers. And the highest of the seven chambers contains within it all of the three supernal sfirot that correspond to the three oceans. The name of that chamber is Heichal Kodesh Kodashim, the chamber of the Holy of Holies. And even that expression itself already alludes that there are three elements present, because Holy of Holies means the Holy of the Holies. There's one holy of another two holies. It's above and beyond and holier, more sacred than the other two. That's called Kodesh HaKodashim. And in general in Kabbalah, the Heichal Kodesh Kodashim begins in Binah, in understanding, but it includes within itself Chokhmah and Keter. And the Keter itself is the holy of the holies. But they're all contained within one state of being, it's called one chamber. So this is also a very important image and a realization that the oceans are three great oceans, but it's all of the waters are connected, and it's all hidden. Now there's another even deeper insight into the waters and their connection, their correspondence to the intellectual hidden levels of the soul. We'll say another introductory statement. The hidden levels of soul is called introverted light that shines within. It's like a vector force from outward or outside inward. It's like thought in the mind. It is not expressed verbally or not audible to the outside world. It's just light that shines within. Whereas the seven continents are called light, or Hameir L'Zulato. The highest level is called Or Hameir L'Yasmo, light which shines to oneself inwardly. It's like an inward vector force of revelation. And the seven are called Or Hameir L'Zulato, light that shines to the other, meaning to the other psyche which is outside of myself. That's outward manifestation. Now, there's a verse in Isaiah that also uses the term, which hardly ever appears again after the second verse of the of the Torah that begins with the statement that the earth, meaning the planet Earth, not the dry land, but the planet Earth was all tohu, chaos and void. So that word tohu, which it says in another place, Lo tohu brah, Hashem did not create the world to remain in the state of tohu. He wanted to be inhabited. That's why he wanted to be. Actually, it's a miracle. It says that the dry land rises above sea level. Because naturally, the water should cover the whole face of the earth. There should be no dry land at all. Because in the four basic elements of the ancients, which is called fire, and air, and water, and earth. So that's exactly, it's like concentric circles. That the highest circle of all is the fire, and the circle within that is the air, and the circle within that is the water, and the circle within that is the earth. You know, that the earth should be totally circumscribed by water. That's natural, the natural way things should be. And even it says that in the future, after the 6 millennia of this world, once more the whole planet Earth will be covered by water. And the sages say that if once more the whole planet Earth will be covered by water, so that means that all of civilization will be destroyed. It's called Chad Charuv. So what, is that really the case, that the whole world will be destroyed because once more the waters will cover the whole face of the earth? So it says that miraculously, obviously this is an image that we can't take 100% literally. We have to try to understand what it means. But the fact that there will be a phenomenon like a flood, so we know that flood is a flood of knowledge, of consciousness of God, that the whole world will be full of the knowledge of God as the seas cover the seabed. And what will we be doing at that time? If there's no, again, in this image, there's no dry land, it's just all waters, it's all divine consciousness. So it says that Hashem will create for every tzaddik, for every soul that has merited this level of consciousness, it will create wings. And for 1 millennia, for the 7th millennia, which is the Shabbat of creation, we will all just fly in the air above the waters. And lest you think that we'll be tired, no, we won't be tired. There are different verses that are quoted. But again, this is an image of the future, that once more things return to their natural state of being, that the waters cover the earth, and that the souls that realize and comprehend those divine waters, which is divine consciousness, will even be flying above those waters. As it says also at the end of the 2nd verse of the Torah, that the Spirit of God was hovering above the waters, and it was flying. Rachefet is poreach. Poreach means to fly. What was that Spirit of God? It's called the Messianic Spirit, the Spirit of Mashiach. In the future, all the souls will have that Messianic Spirit to them. They'll all be a manifestation of Mashiach, and therefore they all will be hovering above the waters for 1,000 years. This is what we have in store, in Mirza Hashem. So once more, the fact that now there are continents is actually a miracle. That miracle took place on the 3rd day of creation, as the Torah says. That the seas subsided and made room for the earth, for the dry land, for the continents to emerge and manifest themselves. So, and actually the verse says, the Rokaha Aretz al Hamayim, that Hashem miraculously, He made the dry land appear and spread out in place of almost 30% of the surface of the earth. Now we said that there's another very important verse in Isaiah that uses the word tohu, but it adds to the word tohu another descriptive image. It says kav tohu. It says that tohu is a line. Now a line can either mean a straight line or it can mean a circle. And the way the sages interpret in Chagigah, in the chapter Ein Dorshin, which is the one chapter in the Talmud and the Gemara, which is exclusively dedicated to the inner secrets of the Torah, to Kabbalah, the source of Kabbalah in the Talmud itself, So there the sages explain that Kav Tohu is actually the one ocean that is it's referred to as a green circular line that encompasses all of the dry land of the earth. Once more, the image that Chazal used for the one world ocean is Kav Yarok Hamakif et Kol Ha'olam Kulo. Based upon this verse that says Kav Tohu, the line of Tohu. In other places we explained at length that there's one of the most important models in Kabbalah is called point, kav, and area. And the tohu, the very concept of tohu, is always the intermediate state, which is called kav. So the origin of that model, of that part of the model, is an explicit verse in Isaiah that says kav tohu. The tohu is a line, but it's referring to a circle that encompasses all of the dry land. Now that kav tohu in Kabbalah is bina, ima. And what the particular part of the world ocean that was in the thought and the mind of the prophets of Israel and of all of mankind that developed in Eurasia and Africa, that Kav Tohu is obviously the Atlantic Ocean. So that's why this is a very important fundamental reason that the Atlantic Ocean, which is the primary thing that is referred to by Kav Tohu, that is Makif, that surrounds all of the dry land, that in particular corresponds to the Sphira of Bina, of understanding. As we'll go on to explain, if there's like the Panama Canal that connects the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean together, it's a man-made conduit. So what it's actually connecting is the two Sphirot, which are called father and mother principles, Abba and Ima. That the Pacific Ocean, whose name means rest and peace, because it's on the one hand it's the biggest of the oceans, on the other hand it's relatively a very peaceful Pacific Ocean. So that's actually the secret of Shabbat, which is Mochin da Abba, the mind space and set of a father, which is wisdom. Siag l'chokma shtika. It's quiet, Pacific. Wisdom is quiet. The Atlantic, once more, is the primary meaning of the Kav Tohu, which is Kav Yarok, the green, all-encompassing line that surrounds all of the inhabited dry land of the earth. That would then mean that the Indian Ocean, which, as we'll see, is very important in the Tanakh, in the Bible, as we usually think of Israel being associated with the Mediterranean Sea, that the Mediterranean is an offshoot of the Atlantic Ocean. But in the Exodus of Egypt, that ocean that played the primary role was the Red Sea, which is an offshoot of the Indian Ocean. Actually, it's the Indian Ocean reaching up and almost touching the Mediterranean Sea. In modern times, so man has created two great canals to connect all of the oceans of the earth. One is the Panama Canal that we quoted a moment ago, and the other is the Suez Canal. The Panama Canal connects the Pacific and the Atlantic, which now we're considering to be Chokmah and Binah. Whereas the Suez Canal connects actually the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. In fact, there's one commentary that says that the Red Sea that the Jewish people passed miraculously, that Hashem had split. And the Song of the Sea, which is the epitome, the climax of the whole Exodus from Egypt, that sea is actually exactly, that place that the Jewish people crossed the sea is exactly where the Suez Canal is now located. And that the Suez Canal, it's called, actually in the Torah, it's not called the Red Sea, it's called the Reed Sea. Yam Suf. Suf is reeds. And some authorities believe that sea, because of the Suez Canals, it no longer exists as a sea, but it's been replaced, man-made, by the Suez Canal. And the function of that canal, of course, is to connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. But the whole Red Sea, if you look on a map, is just an offshoot, it's a branch up from the Indian Ocean towards, pointing up and aspiring to reach and connect itself to the Mediterranean Sea, which is the offshoot of the Atlantic Ocean. So what would then be the secret of the Suez Canal? It would be im en dat and bina. We're now going to say that the Indian Ocean is the third intellectual principle, that the order of the sizes is actually the order of the mental spaces. That the greatest is the Pacific, that's Chokhmah. The second is the Atlantic, which is Bina, which is the Kav Tohu itself, that is Makif Kolo Olam Kulo. And the third is the Indian Ocean, which is therefore Dat. Now, Dat in the heart connects to Yesod. Yesod is Australia, as we'll see, as one of the 7 continents. On the other side, it reaches Africa, which is Gvura, as we'll see. That's the secret of Yosef Yitzchak. The Indian Ocean actually connects Yosef to Yitzchak, which is Australia to Africa. Like the name of the previous Rebbe, Yosef and Yitzchak go together. So the Red Sea goes up from the Indian Ocean towards the Mediterranean. The phrase for that in the Torah would be im en dat en bina. And without dat, you can't have bina. Without bina, you can't have dat. There's no bina without dat, and there's no dat without bina. So what geographically, topologically, what affects that phenomenon? That's the Suez Canal in modern times. So actually we see that man himself has created these two connections. Because dat, any connection is a dat principle, and dat is something which belongs to man. He's created these two connections of the Panama Canal to connect the Pacific to the Atlantic, and of the Suez Canal to connect the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. Right. So this was introductory about the oceans, which is called the Amadiyat Kasya, the hidden reality. Now we'll begin discussing the continents by a very famous statement in the Zohar that discusses the continents and discusses the different hemispheres and parts of the inhabited dry land. And it says that a very, very interesting thing. It says that in Kabbalah, north is usually identified with Gvura, with might, and south is usually identified with water, which is north is fire, Gvura is fire. That's north is the left. If a person is standing facing the east, so north is to his left, and left is Gvura, is might, and the element of might is fire, and his right is to the south, and the element of the south is chesed, loving kindness, and its element is water. Now, fire is hot and water is cold. That's the natural state of being of water. Water actually has two facets to it, or two characteristics to it. One is that it's cold, and the other is that it's wet. So most people think that water is primarily wet, and secondarily it's cold. But we're talking Kabbalah that water is primarily cold, and secondarily it's wet, because you can freeze water, or you can vaporize water. So the fact that water is wet is secondary. But the primary characteristic of water is that it's cold. That's why there's even a she'ilah, a question in halakha, if we're allowed to warm the water of a mikveh. Because maybe the effect that it purifies is only when it's in its pure natural state, which is to be cold. Maybe hot water doesn't do the task. Nonetheless, the psak is that hot water is also good for a mikveh. That's a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. So this is just to say that water, the Zohar asks that since the south is bright and the south is chesed and the south is water, the south should be cold, and the north should be hot because it's fire. But in the northern hemisphere, that's where most people live, even nowadays. That most of the inhabitants, a very, very large percentage of the inhabitants of the earth are in the northern hemisphere, not in the southern hemisphere. But even Africa, most of the people are in the northern, still north of the equator. So relatively, very, very few people living south of the equator, meaning that most of the inhabited region of the earth is the northern hemisphere. So why is it that in that part of the dry land, the further north you go, the colder it gets, and the further south you go, the hotter it gets? That seems to directly contradict the klalim of Kabbalah. That north is fire and the south is water, and that north is hot and south is cold. So the Zohar said this is a question that the Zohar poses, and the answer that the Zohar gives, and there's much deep commentary, that this is one of maybe the most important geographical manifestation of the principle which is called achlifu duchtayv, which is a principle that defines the essence of tikkun, of rectification, which is very similar to inter-inclusion, but it means that the places have reversed, have changed from one to the other, have inversed themselves. That in the place that I would expect to be cold, it's hot, and the place that I would expect to be hot, it's cold, because the different powers are inter-included and actually have changed and inversed their relationship one with regard to the other. And the Zohar says that this is a great phenomenon of inhabited territory. And for that reason itself, the Zohar also knows that there's an equator and there's south of the equator. But this is the reason that most of mankind, even the way it developed initially, and the way it is now also, the vast majority is in the northern hemisphere, because the northern hemisphere manifests this state, this seemingly paradoxical state of inter-inclusion. Whereas if you're living in South America, or you're living in South Africa, or you're living in Australia, which is in the southern hemisphere, so the south is cold. In the southern hemisphere, it's the way lechatchila you think it should. It makes sense. The southern hemisphere makes sense, and the northern hemisphere doesn't make sense. That's what the Zohar said. But in the southern hemisphere, the further you travel south, the colder it gets. And the further you travel north, the hotter it gets. And that's exactly the way it should be, because north is fire and south is water. But what does it mean? It means that the southern hemisphere is less developed, it's less sophisticated, so to speak, than the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is good for, it's an elementary school version of reality. That things fit exactly into place where you think that they should fit initially. But the northern hemisphere manifests this principle of achlifu duchtayv, that the places inverted themselves. And there's a change that north instead of being hot is cold, and the south instead of being cold is hot. And that represents more tikkun, means that it's more miyushav. It's more settable, to be settled, to be inhabited. And so this is a very general, important statement about the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere. And this will now also help us understand the way that we correspond the different continents to the different sefirot themselves. Now, there are three great continents that go together, that are almost connected to one another. The two which are really connected to one another, Asia and Europe. Sometimes it's even referred to as one, as Eurasia. Almost connected to those two is Africa. Now these three, which in ancient times, this is where life developed. And the meeting point, of course, of these three is the chosen land, is the land of Israel itself. That's the place that they meet. Just like the Suez Canal, which has to do with Kriyat Yamsuf, as we said, is actually in two different directions. The Suez Canal is from up, down, and Kriyat Yamsuf was from east to west more. But in any event, that Suez Canal concept is we said before, is connecting Dat to Bina, and the very land of Israel is a land that connects the three continents that go together, which in Kabbalah correspond to the three primary emotions of the heart. Relatively, Asia is still tohu. The first Shemitah, this is theoretical period of 7,000 years, is called the Shemitah of Chesed. And it's still relatively in a state of tohu versus what's to follow it. Asia, which is also very the greatest, the biggest of the continents, which includes Russia and China and all of the other related, and India, all of the other related nations and areas of Earth. That corresponds to Chesed. Europe corresponds to Tiferet, beauty, and Africa to Gvura. So actually, if you're passing from Asia to Africa, you're going from Chesed to Gvura. But the one that's connected more to Asia even than Gvura is Tiferet, just as explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut, the relationship between Yaakov and Abraham. Abraham actually comes from Asia. Where does Abraham come from? He comes from Harav, from Asia. The Jewish people, the Jewish genes begin in Asia. And they come from Asia, which is Chesed of Abraham. They come to Israel. But then they have to descend and connect with Africa, which is Mitzrayim, which is Egypt. That's Gvura. That's why it means constraints. Egypt is constraints. Constraints is Tzimtzum. And Abraham had to go down, and then the descendants of Yaakov had to go down and be in exile there for 210 years in Egypt proper. Now Europe, which is now what's called the foundation or the origin of all modern Western civilization, whether it's Greece or whether it's Rome. So that is that is Tiferet. That's the union. Tiferet is Yefet, Japhet. Yaftet Okim Yefet. Yefet is Tiferet, it's explained. And Yefet is Europe. And Europe is connected most to Asia because of the principle of Yaakov redeeming, Yaakov Asher Pada redeems Abraham. And so this imagery, and obviously the imagery makes much deeper sense to a person that's deeply involved in Kabbalah and Chassidut, the meanings of the different sefirot. But meaning that Asia is a good place for love, and Africa for fear, and Europe for compassion. But they all meet. If they meet at a certain place, it means that that's the Dat, which is called the Nishmatza, the soul. The land of Israel is the soul of all three together. That's why we, the Jewish people, have the three patriarchs as our common fathers, ancestors. Because we're the meeting place of all of these three together. Right, so now we have to have another two to go together. How are the sefirot what is the model of the seven Sfirot in Kabbalah? It's always 3 and 2 and 1 and 1. That's the general division, the intellectual division of the seven lower Sfirot. That there are 3 that go together, then there are 2 that go together, then there's one by itself, and another one at the very end. So that's exactly the way the continents, the dry land is divided on the face of the earth. That the 3 that go together are Asia and Europe and Africa, and the 2 that go together are the 2 Americas, which is North America and South America. Now, North America is, what did we see now? We saw that in the 3, the Chesed and the Tiferet, which both tend to the right, are in the northern hemisphere. Gvura, which is the left, it begins also in the northern hemisphere, but it extends into the southern hemisphere. So the same thing is true of the 2 Americas. That North America has to belong to the right, and which is more inhabited, and South America has to belong to the left. So what pair is that? That pair is Netzach and Hod. That meaning that North America is Netzach, and South America is Hod. And there's something about those 2 that actually go together even more than the 3, because it says that in a certain sense those 2 are just 2 sides of the same coin, or train palgei gufa, 2 sides of the same body. And what connects those 2 loins, or the 2, it can either be, in Kabbalah the image is either the 2 kidneys, or the 2 testicles, or the 2 feet. What connects them is Central America, like Panama, or the Panama Canal exists. Again, since there's a wealth of information and phenomena that, as we said at the very beginning, that relate to the Sfirot, so any image of these 2 Sfirot, Netzach and Hod, which are the 2 feet walking together, once more the 2 kidneys, or the 2 testicles. So what connects them together and makes them just 2 facets or 2 pictures, 2 sides of the same coin, is that strip of Central America in between the 2. For instance, one simple example is that in the physiological systems of the body, Netzach is the endocrine system, the hormones, and Hod is the immune system. Meaning that North America are the hormones of the global village, and South America is the immune system. And we know now in modern physiology and medicine that those 2 systems, more than any other 2 systems of the body, are interrelated and connected to one another, and interdependent, one upon the other. So that interdependence is actually manifested, represented by this strip that connects the 2 together, which from Mexico extends downward through Central America until it reaches South America. Right, we'll go on to explain another image about all of this as soon as we finish. So we have very, very beautifully represented the 3 that go together, and then the 2 that go together with the 2 continents of America. Now we're left with another 2. So the one continent, which is just a big island, as it were, in the middle of the ocean, is Australia. That must correspond then to Yesod, the Sfirah of Yesod. Now Yesod is in the middle line, but it is intended to the left. Tiferet is in the middle line, but it tends to the right, we're taught in Kabbalah. So we said that the right is the northern hemisphere. But Yesod is also an extension of Tiferet, but it tends to the left, and that's why it's in the southern hemisphere. Now Malchut is even more tending to the left. It's also the final Sfirah in the middle axis of the Sfirot, but it totally tends to the left. That must be the place of Let La Migama Klum, the place that is totally without any living essence in its own right. It's empty. What is the empty continent? Antarctica. Once more, according to Kabbalah, it's very, very clear that even though Malchut means kingdom, that there should be something about Antarctica, that the whole earth is is drawn up from below, from Antarctica. And there's something about the kingdom of Mashiach which must have to do with Antarctica. But what we see in reality is that Antarctica is barren. It's cold. As Malchut is the coldest of all Sfirot. It's called the earth, which is cold. It's cold and dry. So, and it's also it's vacant and barren. It says, the Arizal says, for instance, that Ishtok Ufo Damya, that a person has to consider his wife as his own body and love her to the same extent and even more than he loves his own self and his own body. And the Arizal explains because since the Malchut is like the moon that has no light of its own, just what it receives from above. It also has no reality of its own whatsoever. Even its body is not, the body of one's wife is received from the husband. Even their body itself, that's what the Arizal says. Obviously physically we don't see this, but obviously referring to some inner body. There's something inner in Malchut. Since Malchut has nothing of its own, it must receive everything from above. That Sfirah that Malchut is closest to, and it receives from Yesod, is actually closest, related to Hod, which means that Antarctica is close to Argentina, which is the bottom tip of South America. But it also receives, and we have to try to understand how it receives also from Australia. In any event, this is the way to understand in Kabbalah the secret of the 7 continents of the earth. Now we'll conclude this with one more observation, that since we've now identified 10 different elements of the earth, so this also can reflect the planet Earth with its 3 great oceans and 7 continents, can reflect the whole solar system of the sun and its planets, because according to modern astronomy and science, there's a sun which is one, and then it's surrounded by a solar system of 9 planets, even though most recently different astronomers are in question as to Pluto, whether we should still consider it to be a planet or not. But since it's the last one, and according to this new revelation of the way the solar system is formed, and this, as we've discussed at length in another class, so that makes perfect sense that since Pluto should be Malchut, the last of the Sfirot, because there's a sun, Keter, and then another 9 that surround it. So it's really a question of whether it even exists as a planet, whether it should be considered a planet or not. The same question is about Malchut. Sometimes if you take Malchut out of the number of the Sfirot, that's called Mekatzet Pintiot, it's called cutting down plants or stems. It's bad, or you should consider it and count it one of the Sfirot. But it's a question. It's not clear whether Malchut is actually one of the others, because it tends to descend and separate itself from the higher Sfirot above it, from which it receives its reality. In any event, just to make a long story, which is really a long story short, the seas of the earth should reflect in some way Mercury and Venus. Then the earth itself as a whole is Olam Chesed Yibaneh. It's also Ladat Ba'aretz Darkecha. It has Dat in it. Because only on earth are the conscious beings that possess Dat. But it's also founded and constructed out of Chesed. That's what the verse says. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. And then Ma'adim, of course, is the star of the planet of the red planet, which is Gvura. That's explicit. Even the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, said to the Jewish people before the Exodus that see that you have a bad star that's coming up on the horizon, which is a bad omen for your leaving Egypt. And the way it's said, the Chazal says explicitly, referring to Mars. He had a special affinity and sense of Mars. And that exactly fits with what we said before, that Mitzrayim here represents Gvura, which is Africa in general. And its affinity with one of the planets is thereby the planet of Mars. Then Jupiter is Tiferet, and Saturn is Netzach, and Uranus is Hod, and Neptune is Yesod, and Pluto is Malchut. So we can all see that all of the whole solar system reflects itself on the face of the planet Earth. Let's make another very important, well-known observation, that there's no other planet that has liquid water on its surface. Only the planet Earth. That's the reason that life can exist on the planet Earth, because of the water on the face of the earth. Mayim Chayim, water is the source of life in general. That's why in the Torah and even now in modern biology, life begins in the seas, in the waters. The animal kingdom in the Torah begins on the fifth day of creation, which is in the waters, and then it rises to the land. The one thing that we wanted to now point out is that Tzedek, which is Uranus, thereby would reflect itself in Europe. But actually, the Earth itself and its sun, the Earth has an asteroid which is called the Moon. The Moon, not the Sun, is Asia and the land of Israel itself. It says that the Jewish people resemble the moon, count the calendar in accordance with the moon, and in the future the moon is a omen of the rejuvenation and the resurrection of the Jewish people. So it's actually said that the land of Israel corresponds to the moon, and that's why the very first place that the Jewish people reached in the land of Israel was Yericho, Jericho, which comes from the word moon, which is called the key to entering the land of Israel. The key to the lock that closes Israel, and if you open up that lock with that key, then you've opened up the whole land of Israel. So in a certain sense, Asia is the earth, or the superficial, called the superficial, the relatively superficial dimension of the earth, and its inner dimension actually reflects the moon principle, which is the land of Israel. Africa is Mars, as we said. Europe is Jupiter. But now what we're trying to get at is to get to Panama once more. So in order to understand Panama, we have to understand what the two Americas are: Northern America and Southern America, South America. So they would correspond to Saturn and Uranus. In the Central America, it's like taking a spaceship. Panama is like taking a spaceship from Saturn to Uranus. So whoever has a sense of spaceships and maybe science fiction a little bit, but it's not fiction, can imagine North America as Saturn and South America as Uranus, and this spaceship that's transversing these two continents that go together in a certain sense more than any other two continents is Central America, with the Panama Canal in the middle. That would then mean that Australia reflects Neptune, which which makes very, very good sense if you think about it for a moment, and that Antarctica reflects Pluto, which also makes very, very good sense. So this is just a final observation of taking another phenomenon, but it's obviously a related phenomenon because it has to do with science, and the planet Earth obviously is part of the solar system, and seeing the whole in the part. Is any true phenomena the part reflects? It's like a hologram that reflects the whole. So in a certain sense, in the three seas, and meaning that actually Mercury would be reflecting the Pacific Ocean, and the Atlantic is a reflection of Venus. And then the continents begin from Earth to the end, as we said before. And so this is our discussion of the first primer of understanding the topology of the planet Earth.